You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Star Trek Prodigy story, Masquerade. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom. You're looking particularly outrageous today.
Well, I feel outrageous. And I think we're all a little outrageous today. And Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Folks, be sure to get your very own Secrets of Star Trek t-shirt and look outrageous yourself by visiting sqpn.com/merch. It makes I must say, a particularly wonderful Christmas gift for someone, the Star Trek fan in your life. I also want to tell you about another show in the Star Quest Network you're sure to enjoy, called Praise Station Portable. You can get the prayers of the Divine Office, the Liturgy of the Hours of the Church, and pray along. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/PSP. So we're talking about this latest episode of Star Trek Prodigy. And Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
Last time, the kids and the outrageous Okona snuck into the neutral station. Praise Station Portable was in the buffer. Sorry. Take two. Last time, the kids and the outrageous Okona snuck into the neutral zone, and Romulans intercepted biological Janeway and warned her that she was dangerously close to entering the neutral zone. This time, Admiral Jellicoe from that two-parter in Next Gen shows up and on video screen and orders Janeway not to enter the neutral zone and to destroy the protostar if necessary to keep it out of Romulan hands. Now, Admiral Jellicoe, although a very competent captain, had a reputation for being hardcore, and his latest order is totally hardcore because the protostar has children on it. Speaking of them, the kids go to a planet where they can get the protostar repaired. They also meet Okona's former client, a geneticist, who reveals that Dal is actually a human genetic augment. So he's a human with little bits of DNA from like 23 other species in him. Thinking that he has no parents and feeling like he's a genetic mistake, Dal has her secretly give him a dermal implant on the back of the neck that will cause his latent genes to manifest and make him better. A group, in some unspecified way, a group of Romulan Tal Shiar agents tries to seize control of the protostar while it's in space dock, but its command codes have been locked out and they need the captain of the ship to unlock them. They then find the kids and mistake Okona for the captain because he's the adult in the room. But as soon as they realize that the captain is really Dal, the outrageous Okona outrageously ditches the kids and does not return. Dal activates his new dermal implant to ramp up his genes and defeat the Tal Shiar, but his genes start going haywire. Murph, in his new humanoid form, turns out to be a powerful fighter, and he saves the day and is named the protostar's new security officer. While all that's going on, biological Janeway orders photon torpedoes fired on the protostar in space dock, but at the last minute, she detonates the strike prematurely. Afterwards, Zero and Rock remove Dal's dermal implant before any permanent damage can be done to his genes, and back on biological Janeway's ship, Ensign Essentia confronts the Diviner. She activates the hidden robot Dreadnought and then activates her own dermal implant, revealing that she's not a Trill, but a member of the Diviner's race, and she says that he wasn't the only one sent back in time to find the protostar. The end.
So the plot thickens. So we have a fairly common theme we find in programming aimed at kids, which is you're good just the way you are. You don't need to be improved. You're who you are because of the way you were made, and that's good enough.
Okay, so that may be a ridiculous trope in a lot of contexts, but here it's true.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's bad.
Gwen is totally right when she's telling Dal, "Look, you're fine. You do not need the secretive, sketchy genetic engineering upgrade. That is not going to be the best thing for you.
Right. And that whole thing is worsened by the fact that Dal is jealous of Okona at the beginning. Like everyone else looks up to him, and even Gwyn. And so it's kind of interesting how they've kind of have this very, very latent, almost invisible romantic thing between Gwyn and Dal. Like Dal kind of is attracted to her, but they don't. It's very implicit, not explicit at all.
Kid romance chemistry, but nothing explicit.
Exactly. And so he's jealous of the fact that she laughs at Okona's jokes or whatever, and that Okona appears to be more capable, more worldly, certainly more mature, although maybe not.
Yeah.
By all evidence. And so that becomes the driving force for Dal in this episode, is this reaction to Okona. And then, they need to get the third cell repaired so that they can do the proto-warp thing. And Okona comes up with this Noble Isle starport that they have to go to. And
which it's unclear to me, is this inside the Romulan Empire or what?
This was the whole thing I was kind of unclear on with the stellar cartography, if you will, of this whole thing. Is like, because in Star Trek, it always seems like the Federation Starfleet can't enter the neutral zone, but the Romulans seem to do it all the time.
Yeah.
If a Starfleet ship were to enter the neutral zone, it would be war. But if the Romulans do it, it's no big deal. It's expected.
They also have those cloaking devices.
Yeah.
Right.
But this is so I guess this thing has to at least be in the neutral zone. This planet.
That's what I figured it was. It was a neutral zone, a planet in the neutral zone, which actually would make sense that a black market planet would exist
would be between them
in the neutral zone, because in theory it's Wild West.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because otherwise the Dauntless biological Janeway ship could just zoom up and recapture the protostar.
Right. But even then, like shooting photon torpedoes at what had to have been a very long range. I don't know. Yeah. I don't want to press the technology bit too much for that sort of thing, because I'm not sure the story is designed to bear that load. But nevertheless, I also agree that it seemed to be in the neutral zone. And so and it's kind of interesting because yet another planet where you can't go down to the surface via transport conveniently, but it's a space elevator. So they have to use the space elevator to go up and down.
At least we don't have, they point out that this planet is covered in ion storms or something. So you have to use the space elevator. But they don't harp on, our transporters are offline. They don't throw it at us suddenly.
Yeah. They seem to be working hard to reduce the ability of transporters to be the magic saving device
constantly.
Which okay. I can understand that impulse, because it makes for more drama. That's for sure.
I notice it particularly on this show, and I think the reason for that is that these are kids, and they are going to get into dangerous situations because it's an action show. But unlike adults who would be Starfleet officers, they don't have an obligation to stay and solve whatever problem is causing the danger. And so adults who are here on a mission will be, and have adult responsibilities, are going to be less likely to, and the audience is going to be less likely to say, why don't they just beam out and run away?
Right.
But with kids, it's much more of a, why don't they just beam out and run away from this dangerous situation? And so it seems like they have to forcibly take the transporters offline much more frequently on Prodigy than on other Star Trek shows.
That's a good
argue
point.
too. It simplifies the plot too when you don't have this magic device that can move from one place to another. Like you said, first of all, because you don't have the runaway, but you also have we could just go to anywhere we need to go.
Right. It creates more and better drama in that sense.
Right.
So what we're saying is the transporter was a mistake.
Yes, it was a cost-saving mistake. So you mentioned that biological Janeway is interacting with Admiral Jellicoe, played by Ronnie Cox.
By the way, the transporter didn't have to be the mistake it is, because they decided to explain it by its it takes apart your molecules and puts them back together. In which case, you can clone anybody, you can keep anybody from dying. It creates all these different magical solutions to life's problems. But if they had just said it folds space so that you're now there,
yeah,
none of that would be true.
That's true. That's true.
Yep.
Then we wouldn't have the mirror universe. Well, you could still do it actually.
Yeah,
You could
fold
fold
space
dimensions.
so you're in the mirror universe.
Yeah.
That's right. So as we're saying, like Admiral Jellicoe, played by Ronnie Cox, who showed up originally in TNG's Chain of Command Part 1 and 2. So nice to see him there. Ronnie Cox.
There are 4 lights.
Yeah.
Ronnie Cox is such a great antagonist. I won't say he's a villain. He's not a villain in this, obviously. And he wasn't even really a villain in Chain of Command. Although in Stargate, he's a good villain,
Probably
too.
very much so. Kinsey is very much a bad guy.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm sure Ronnie Cox is a nice guy, but I just can't stand him whenever I see him in a role. It's just so funny.
Really?
He's just one of those actors. Well, I mean, he's always playing these people that you dislike, which is kind of funny. I'm sure there are places I've seen him where I don't dislike the character, but yeah.
He's just one of those actors that does a really good, a bad guy that you like to hate.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I enjoy his performance, but yeah.
He plays a good-natured, really good banjo player in the clip from Deliverance that I've seen on YouTube.
There's that. I'm not sure he's a good guy in that, but anyway.
Well, I know I've never seen Deliverance. I know his character dies. But my impression from the one banjo playing clip I've seen is that he's a good guy.
Okay. I have never seen Deliverance myself either.
I haven't either.
Yeah, that's a generation ahead of us, I think. So Jellicoe says to Janeway that the Federation is finally making steps toward peace with the Romulans, which connects with what we saw in Picard, which is this uneasy peace, and what we know of what Spock was doing in TNG with unification. And so I kind of like that they've made sure to weave this in, this common thread about what's going on with the Romulans, that it's uneasy. We're not friends yet, but we're not exactly enemies still. We're kind of in between a little bit still. And, he's willing to let this prototype starship with a very powerful, very important drive and kids aboard, like you mentioned, get destroyed rather than risk peace and risk the Romulans getting this. So it's an interesting and somewhat complex geopolitical problem that they introduce here in the show.
Yeah, except for the kids, it's really not that big. I mean, the destroy rather than let it fall into the hands of the scuttle order is entirely reasonable, because we've got the plans to this thing. We can just make more. It's better that they don't get it so that they can't get the plans to it. Yeah, it's a lot. However, like fire on children is kind of that's really hardcore, dude.
That is hardcore. Yeah. I was going to say it's a lot like the stealth helicopter that crashed when they went and got Bin Laden back in 2012. They when it crashed, they blew that thing to bits because they didn't want that falling to anyone's hands as they exfiltrated.
And with good reason. If you know the history of World War II and immediately after, there was a B-29 that had to make an emergency landing in the Soviet Union, and the B-29 was at the time our most advanced bomber, and the Soviets released the crew back to the U.S. and then stripped the plane down to bolts and documented everything. And all their bombers from that point on were B-29 clones, including rivets that were missing on the original plane.
Oh, wow. They
literally, like, if there was a rivet missing, they drilled the hole and didn't fill it. So,
wow. That is attention to detail.
So there's good reason to worry that your advanced equipment is going to get copied, because it has happened.
Yeah. And like, even with stealth technology, people don't realize it, but stealth technology actually goes back to the end to World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And when a stealth plane crashes, I mean, one of the most valuable, not the only, but one of the most valuable things about a stealth craft is the materials that are on it, that are radar reflecting or absorbing, and the materials science involved in producing those is one of the biggest secrets of a stealth craft. So yeah, you want to blow up your stealth craft if it's in danger of falling into enemy hands.
Exactly.
And Janeway, Jellicoe accuses her of being emotionally attached to Chakotay, and it's like,
I just don't want to blow up kids, dude.
Yeah.
It was almost like he was pulling the women's emotions card a little bit. If you know Janeway, she's not a sentimentalist. I mean, she's certainly moral, as we saw throughout Voyager, but she's not a sentimentalist. So it's kind of funny. But like, no, I don't. Like you said, I don't want to blow up a bunch of kids. I have like some questions here about like why about like why can she do this if she can't enter the neutral zone and that sort of stuff. But we talked about that. So one of the things we know about Noble Isle, or we're told about the Noble Isle station planet, is that it's a hub of unregulated cutting edge science, which the Federation would frown on. Their Federation laws prevent some of the stuff because, unregulated science can do things like releasing bioweapons from labs and that sort of stuff and get out into the populace, which would be a terrible thing if that happened.
Exactly.
And so we have Okona's, as you mentioned, Jimmy, Okona's client, Dr. Jago, is a geneticist, and he was apparently, so in last episode, he was bringing her a shipment of something, and he lost it in the whole mess that happened on that other planet.
Yeah.
And
we never find out what it is, but you can imagine if it's going to a geneticist that it's going to have something to do with genetic samples or something like that.
Or it's biomimetic gel or some sort of contraband like that.
Yeah. I have a recollection that they actually said what it is, but it went by and I didn't write it down because it's not that important. But so the biggest thing about this episode, the biggest advancement of the overall story is the explanation somewhat of who Dal really is and where he comes from, because that's been a big question: is who is he? What species is he? No one seems to know. And so she says he's the product of the proteges of Dr. Arik Sung, which I think is fascinating because Sung is the creator of Data. And so
this is
until
Arik Sung, which goes all the way back to
Sung.
Enterprise.
Oh, the Wrath of Khan Sung.
No. Arik Sung was a geneticist who came after the eugenics wars because he's alive in the period of Enterprise, but he did have augments.
Yes.
Right. This was another Brent Spiner playing Dr. Sung. That's not what the fourth Dr. Sung we've had on Star Trek.
There are 4 or 5 at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. They keep showing him.
He was
like
at
the master.
He was at the Colds, or he was under arrest for doing illegal genetic stuff, and it was taken to the cold storage for the where all the augment embryos were being stored, and released them. And
right.
So
no, I remember that now.
Then this says that he ended up in the neutral zone and continued his work, and so students of his created Dal.
And yeah, so he's a product of Dr. Jago says the artificial species hybridization, where his human DNA was augmented with the recessive DNA of 26 alien species. And we get this graphic on screen that, of course, the obsessive Trekkies at Memory Alpha have looked at. And so we've got symbols for various species, including Endorian, Bajoran, Breen, Cardassian, Ferengi, Hirogen, Kazon, which is interesting. That's the Delta Quadrant. Klingon, Riemann, Ryzian, Sona, Suliban, Vidian, again, another Delta Quadrant species, and Vulcan. Then we have 4 that are only from Star Trek games. These symbols for the Gorn, Species 8472, which I'd like to know how they did that.
That would be weird.
An Orion and a Tellarite. Which we see actually clearly on his face at one of the point in this. We have a Tholian, which was from a reference book.
Oh, come on. How can you hybridize Tholians with any organic life form?
Exactly. There's a Romulan emblem that was only seen in the marketing materials for Star Trek Nemesis, never on screen. And then multi-species groups like the Dominion, the Maquis, and Zindi. I'm not sure what Maquis would be. Like what species? Mostly humans and Bajorans, but okay.
Yeah.
Well, then they even said there was a Q symbol. So did they even take some from Q?
which again would be
How
a
would you do
neat
that?
trick. Yeah, a neat trick.
Maybe they got
So-
some of his DNA when he was turned into human.
Or yeah, there were, because he did get medically examined. Also, there have been other Q in human form, like
Yeah.
that girl, the teenage girl,
Yeah.
who he came to visit once, and her parents were Qs that got killed in a tornado after they became human and stuff like that.
So it's an interesting idea that what it creates is all this story potential inside of Dal, all of this DNA that is recessive that could, in this episode, we get lots of it coming out, but they could play it over time as he explores these different aspects of who he is, could really make for an interesting character arc.
Yeah, and as he grows older, more traits can come out and become more aware of them and stuff.
Yeah.
Although I do have to say, this is this typical Star Trek trope of DNA changes happen instantaneously. Their bone
Yes.
structure change, their facial structure change, everything about them changes instantaneously, and DNA changes don't work that way.
Yeah.
They don't.
It takes a while for the proteins to manifest when a DNA segment gets turned on.
Right.
Yeah.
By the way, so one of the things about this is Dal is now convinced he doesn't have parents, and I'm not buying that for a minute. I think Dal
No.
has parents, and his parents were also augments.
hmm
That's entirely possible. I mean, it could also be a situation like Dr. Bashir, whose
Mhm.
parents submitted him for enhancement because he wasn't special enough in the first place.
And
Yeah.
they did say that he started out from a human embryo that were then added on to.
Right.
So to have a
he's-
human embryo means you have a mother and a father.
And he's a human.
Even that, I don't know that we need to take that as gospel, because that sounds like conjecture to me. I mean, what we can know with certainty is he's got these genes, but whether they were put in him after he was conceived or whether he was conceived with them is,
See,
to my mind, an open question.
Mm.
I thought it said basically that he was a human embryo that then they added the DNA to. So I don't see that as conjecture if I remember correct. I might be wrong, but if I remember correctly, it was stated that he started from a human embryo. So.
You're correct. That's what they said. I just don't believe it. I think that's to juice the drama of Dal thinking he's an orphan, and then they're going to reveal, oh, but really, no, he did have parents, and they love him very much.
Right. Because his immediate thought is, oh, I was grown in a lab. I'm a failed lab experiment.
Mhm.
But and that is again what impels him to be special. I want to be special. Jago offers to fix Dal, quote unquote. He says no at first in front of the others, but immediately as soon as they leave, he turns around, comes back, and says, "Okay, yeah." And it seems at first the main value of the enhancements is to kind of turn him into a jerk. He acts like a jerk toward everybody.
He turns into a little Dr. Bashir because he's had an intelligence and agility boost, and he's a jerk now. So
Yeah, he becomes Dr. Bashir. So, yeah, and as you mentioned, the Romulans, the Tal Shiar. I really like the design of the Tal Shiar, by the way, in this. The uniforms were really cool. They're using the weapons that we saw in Picard, by the way. Those were that we first saw those. So those are Picard relative.
These are commando type, ninja secret, whatever uniforms, the action gear that they're wearing.
It'd be fun to see them in like the final season of Picard or something like that in live action. Be kind of curious to see what they would look like. But they've snuck, as you mentioned, they snuck aboard the ship. They can't get control of it without getting the captain of the ship. And it is fun that their immediate assumption is, oh, Okona, the adult in the room, must be the captain. I mean, it's a logical assumption, I guess. It's a and
by the way, before we completely move on from Dal's genetic stuff, I wanted to point out the way that Dr. Jago gets his DNA is she walks up to him and rips out a hair.
Yeah.
And okay, fine. But the thing to know about that is if you want to do a DNA test on someone, rip it out so that you get the root. Because it's the root of the hair where the DNA is. If all you have is the hair itself, that's just keratin. You're not going to get usable DNA out of that.
Yeah, hair has no DNA in it. It's it by itself. So they go to they skydive off of the space elevator. So this is, I count maybe the third time in Star Trek we've seen people skydiving off of space elevators.
If you've got a space elevator, you got to skydive off of it. That's obvious.
It's true.
Thanks, J.J. Abrams.
So they do the skydive. It goes much more smoothly than it did on Lower Decks. Let's just put it that way.
So running back up the stairs and climbing up the walls and everything.
Right. I do kind of like the fact that Okona bolts at the first sign of trouble. Like, he's out of here, because it turns out Okona is still the same jerk he was in Next Generation. Yeah. He's not reliable. He's not Han Solo, and he's not Riker. And
they didn't really redeem his character here.
No,
he's less obnoxious than he was in the original episode, but he's still an unreliable jerk.
Do you think it's the last we've seen of him, or no?
Don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. And when he bailed on the kids, I thought it was tactical.
Yeah.
Or I thought he was going to come back. Or at minimum, even if he is sincerely sneaking away, I think he's going to have a change of heart. But no, he didn't. He just left the episode there.
Yeah, he just ran out on them.
Equipment they needed for the Protostar, nonetheless.
Right, which apparently they were able to work around, I guess. But so Dal has this button on the back of his neck that he presses when he wants to change. And so he presses it once too many times, apparently, and starts going through these unstoppable genetic changes. And he's like all these weird protuberances all over him. And he's got Vulcan ears and Tellarite snout and all the rest. And it turns out he actually
antennas.
Right. And becomes, while at first he takes out the Romulan Death Squad pretty easily, he becomes useless because of these changes. And it's Murph, as you mentioned, who he's in a carry ball, like, because he was kind of out of control on board the ship. And they let him out, and because the Romulans are attacking them while they're going up on the space elevator. And he just takes out the Romulans like nothing. Like, I guess we found our new security chief, because Rock is now a science officer. And so Murph is new security chief.
Kind of think, Matrix type fighting, where he almost literally does the, hand out, waving at him, come on, kind of deal.
Yeah. And so meanwhile, Janeway has, like, she's monitoring what's going on, the biological Janeway. And so she's fired the torpedoes, the micro torpedoes.
And this is a really dramatic moment.
Yep.
Where, I mean, more so, I think, for an adult in the audience than it would be for a kid, because Janeway knows that some of the kids are not on the ship, but she doesn't know that they're all off. And in fact, they're not.
Yeah.
Jankum Pog and Zero are both on that ship, and she fires torpedoes at a ship containing children.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. That is dramatic. And she wants to abort and self-destruct the torpedoes, but can't until she knows that the Romulans have been stopped, which of course happens at the last second, because that's how it works. And so they don't have to destroy the Protostar. And then once aboard the ship, all is well. They've removed, as you mentioned, they've moved the DNA enhancements from Dal.
Man, they've got to be so close to that planet, because the only when they have to see the kids fighting the Romulans. Right. On the space elevator. Unless they're using some kind of faster than light sensors, their sensors are light speed limited, and they'd have to be within a light second or two of that planet.
Mm-hmm.
I think in Star Trek, all the sensors have to be faster than light capable, like subspace, something or other. Because there's no way they could
people at faster than light. Wow.
Send a probe, maybe they sent a probe, a relay probe. I don't know.
Subspace communications.
That could be.
A drone. So all is well. Jenkins repairing the ship's damage and all that sort of stuff. And then, as you mentioned, we cut to the final dramatic scene, which I didn't see coming. I'm just going to say this was good. Yeah. Asensio's trying to get the Diviner to remember, trying to get out of him and try to get him, his faculties back. And she releases Dreadnought, which was in the table, this coffee table, which like, whoa,
is a transformer.
Yeah,
I wonder if that's her own Dreadnought or if it's the same one.
I think the one Diviner's Dreadnought was destroyed on the Protostar, if I recall correctly. When so it must be hers, yeah. And although parts of him weren't at the end of that mid-season finale, didn't parts of him still exist active? Or am I misremembering?
There was like distorted version of it where, you know, it looked like it hadn't been replicated correctly.
Okay. So maybe that's still hanging out there as a possible plot thread. But in this case, we have a Dreadnought, and then Essentia reveals that she's really one of the diviner species, which is
Valnakat.
Valnakat. Thank you. And so hence the name, the episode name, Masquerade. Because before this, you think it's Dal who's a masquerade, you know, masquerading all these other species. But also Essentia is a masquerade for Valnakat.
Mm-hmm.
She also reveals to the diviner that he's secretly in hell and she's actually a demon here to torture him.
Yeah.
It is not a good place where he is. So that's, again, another interesting dramatic change to this storyline. I'm curious, why would they have sent another one back undercover to be in Starfleet?
Make sure that that if the primary mission fails, you've got a backup.
Right. And that also leads to the question, how many did they send back? I mean, possibly more. So that's interesting. So
this is kind of like the Founders plot line on DS9, where how many of the Founders had infiltrated the Federation and all that.
I mean, it's really, if they're shapeshifters in this way, I mean, it really does feel a lot like the Founders plot on DS9. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Now, the question is, was that implant a genetic thing like Dal had, or was it more of a holographic? More like the Doctor's.
Visually, the device was identical, so I assume we're meant to understand that this is a genetic thing.
Right.
So she has been passing genetically as a Trill. You know, if you do a DNA scan, it's going to show Trill and things like that.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, so it'll be interesting to see where they go with that, because this is they're not holding back, frankly, on the story drama in this series. They're not resting on their laurels.
Yeah, it's quite fast paced and it's much more complex than I would have suspected for a kid show.
Yeah, yeah. So, Father Cory, any final thoughts?
Nothing else here.
Jimmy?
No, I just thought this was an outrageous episode.
Well, it's outrageous of you to say so. So I'd like to take a moment to thank our outrageous patrons who make it possible for us to create this sequence of Star Trek, including Mark S., Thomas D., John B., Vince S., and Melanie S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the sequence of Star Trek in all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us. We'd love to hear what you thought of this episode of Star Trek Prodigy called Masquerade. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. And you can also now watch the Secrets of Star Trek in full video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the next episode of Star Trek Prodigy called Preludes. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
It's been outrageous.
And Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thank you, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, science rules, and science needs rules.